If you ask the internet when was electricity discovered, you'll quickly find out that Google doesn't know everything. This one says that Benjamin Franklin discovered it. This one says it was the ancient Greeks. This one's actually probably closer to the truth. But the Greeks learned a lot from the Egyptians, and they didn't always give credit where it was due. The Egyptians certainly knew about electricity as a basic concept. The electric catfish of the Nile was well known to ancient Egyptians. And they knew enough about electricity to use animals like this to treat people with epilepsy and to provide temporary pain relief. But we're going to take this one step further. There are some unexplained features in the Great Pyramid, and some have suggested that it may have produced electricity. Specifically, it's been proposed that the pyramid may have served as a Lord Kelvin's thunderstorm device. In today's video, we'll dive into those unexplained features and we'll detail exactly how a Lord Kelvin's thunderstorm device works. So after a bunch of research on Egypt's Old Kingdom, I was quizzed by Professor of Egyptology at Harvard, Peter Manuelian, who eventually said,
"You're now an Egyptologist, or at least a Giza expert."
Thanks, man.
So now we're ready to tackle this. The pyramids are closed because of the pandemic. Change of plans. Instead of this version of Indiana Jones, you're going to get something closer to this one. I know, I'm disappointed too, but hey, no snakes. So let's crack open the Great Pyramid of Giza and take a look at these unexplained features. What immediately stands out to me is the Grand Gallery. Its purpose isn't clear. If you look inside of it, you'll see a long, tall, inclined room, and there are these ledges on either side of the walkway. We also see alternating short and long slots on those ledges. There's a groove cut into the walls which span the entire space. At the top of the Grand Gallery, there's an opening which connects to a space over the King's Chamber. More spaces were discovered over it via dynamite archaeology. When the second relieving chamber was opened, they found a fine black powder evenly spread on the floor. The powder was later identified as insect carcasses. These spaces have long been called relieving chambers, as it's believed that they relieve the pressure over the King's Chamber. But notice that the Queen's Chamber is farther down in the pyramid, and you would think that the pressure would be even greater there, and yet the Queen's Chamber has no such relieving chambers. There are also these shafts. These are completely unique to the Great Pyramid. In all of the time that we've spent studying ancient Egypt, we've found no analog for them. Here's what we do know. The King's Chamber shafts extend all the way to the outside, whereas the Queen's Chamber shafts don't. The Queen's Chamber shafts are blocked by these blocking stones. Another curious feature about these blocking stones are these copper pins. We have no idea what their purpose is. Unlike the yellow limestone, which makes up the bulk of the pyramid, white limestone was used for the slabs and the surrounding area. The only other place that we've seen white limestone used on the pyramid are the casing stones. Few casing stones survive today, many of which were taken for use on buildings elsewhere. The mainstream ideas about the shafts don't make a lot of sense. Regarding the constellation alignment theory, the shafts don't point to certain stars as once believed. Also, you have to ask yourself why the pathway to the stars would be needed in the first place. The Egyptians believe the soul isn't blocked by physical objects, so this doesn't seem very likely. Also, with the air shaft theory, other pyramids don't have air shafts, so why would they be needed here if they weren't needed before or after this pyramid? Likewise, the blocking stones have been attributed to a symbolic doorway for the spirit to cross to the afterlife. While it is true that the Egyptians did put false doors on tombs to allow the spirit to receive offerings, they don't resemble what we see in the Great Pyramid. Also, structures with false doors don't hide them in shafts. Further, false doors are almost always located on western walls. These shafts are oriented north and south. They almost certainly are not false doors. Another oddity is the Subterranean Chamber. Why would the builders go through such great lengths to make a chamber and yet leave it unfinished? Now that you know the basics of the internal anomalies of the pyramid, let's take a look at an electrical generator that the ancient Egyptians may have known about. This simple device has no moving parts, just falling water. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not impressive though. This little device can generate thousands of volts of electricity. Here's what's going on. We have a reservoir containing water. We have two streams which pass through two cylinders. The streams naturally break up into droplets at some point, and we've positioned the cylinders at that transition point. The droplets then collect into buckets. Because the buckets are insulated from each other, there's always going to be a small initial difference in charge between them. In our example, the right bucket is slightly negatively charged compared to the other one. The right bucket is connected to the cylinder on the opposite stream, making it slightly negative as well. The charge on the left cylinder will attract positive ions from the water. The water droplets from that left-hand stream carry that positive charge along with it, and those drops fall into the bucket, giving the bucket a slight positive charge. Now the right cylinder is positively charged, and it similarly attracts the negative ions. It exponentially accumulates voltage with every drop, and the result is a substantial electrical discharge. Today we refer to this device as Lord Kelvin's Thunderstorm. The ancient Egyptians had access to water, metal, and stone, all of the materials needed to make this work. Let's see if we can map the functionality of our sparking device into the Great Pyramid, and we'll see if those anomalous features make more sense. Let's start at the Grand Gallery. To get ideal results, we'll want wide streams, which means that the space needs to be fairly tall. The larger diameter streams, the more voltage that we can create. Just like in our experiment earlier, we'll want to insulate the buckets from the wet floor. Otherwise the voltage will leak. This may explain the ledges on either side of the Grand Gallery. The room and the ledges are both sloped, so you'll need some way of keeping the buckets from tipping over. How about we use platforms to create a horizontal ledge for them? Remember that there are 28 slots on either side, so this would accommodate 14 platforms and buckets on each side. In our spark generator we use 2 cylinders and 2 buckets, but what if we added more? Here we have 4 cylinders and 4 buckets, and we've wired them up together. The result is that the frequency of the spark generation increases. Next, we'll need to locate the reservoir. It needs to be above the buckets and ideally nearby. Somewhere over the Grand Gallery would be ideal. In 2017, scientists detected the big void directly above the Grand Gallery. For our machine to work, this chamber would be needed, and the placement is ideal. What purpose could these shafts serve for our machine? Remember that they are completely unique to the Great Pyramid, and we have no context in which to place them. For our machine, we could use them to route wiring to the outside of the pyramid. The angles are close to optimal to have the shortest distance from the chamber to the exterior of the pyramid. The goal appears to be that they were trying to set the exit at the same height. I suspect that the King's Chamber shafts also had slabs with copper fittings, but in this case they'd be located at the edge of the pyramid. I'll cover my reasoning why at the bonus section towards the end of the video. These slabs may have served as strain relief for the wiring. Here's what I mean. Imagine an electrical plug connected to an outlet on your ceiling. There's a point at which the weight of the wire will cause it to unplug itself. This King's Chamber shaft is over 50 meters long and it has a steep slope. Strain relief may have been added to handle this type of problem. What purpose could these chambers serve? Perhaps instead of relieving chambers, they were used for filtration. We don't want sediment fouling our engines. This is why we have a fuel filter between our gas tank and engine. The ancient Egyptians were well aware of sediment filtration. The powderized bug carcasses may have been a filter medium. The only reason it was noteworthy at the time was the color. The concept is similar to how we use diatomaceous earth today. Water might come into these chambers, get filtered, flow through the sloped passageway, and then into the Grand Gallery. And this may explain the purpose of the grooves along the walls of the Grand Gallery. They could support a sloped surface for water to flow. Holes could be cut out in it to allow water to flow into the buckets. Excess water would then follow the slope down to the well shaft into the subterranean chamber. Perhaps the subterranean chamber was never intended to be a resting place of a king. It might have been just a way to dispose of the excess water, to allow it to flow back into the Nile. Now we currently don't know of a connection between the relieving chambers and the big void, but this may not be too surprising, as dynamite was used to gain access to those areas. The operation may have obscured the path to the void. Perhaps once we get access to the big void, we'll be able to find the other end of that channel. For now, I'll leave it as a question mark. If there's no channel, then the idea is a bust. If the idea is correct, then it would tie together these mysteries: the purpose of the copper fittings in the slabs and the shafts, the purpose of the grooves in the walls of the Grand Gallery, the raised ledges of the Grand Gallery, the purpose of the passageway in the lowest relieving chamber and the Grand Gallery, the purpose of the big void, presence of the powderized bug carcasses on the floor of a relieving chamber, the purpose of the relieving chambers themselves, and the reason why the subterranean chamber is unfinished. You might be wondering if there's any evidence of water in the pyramid. Well, yes. When water comes in contact with stone, it dissolves the salt in the stone, and when that evaporates, it leaves behind the salt on the surface. We call that efflorescence. Efflorescence has been observed in these areas of the pyramid. It's important to note, though, that water may have come from more recent sources, perhaps even from the exhaled breath of visitors. Once we get access to the big void, perhaps we'll see efflorescence there too, and we'll know that wasn't due to human presence. Is there any indirect evidence of electricity in their mythology? There's a myth called the story of Re, where a god created a magical snake that could inflict a sting described like this: "It's like fire, and yet is not fire. It's like water, and yet not water. I burn and I shiver, while all my limbs tremble." Is there any indirect written proof that they incorporated a spark generator specifically into the Great Pyramid? The answer is yes again. In one of the oldest documents that we have, it tells the story of a magician who was consulted for his knowledge to apply to the construction of Khufu's tomb. In that same document, the magician had the power to reanimate the dead. If you apply an electrical shock to your muscles, they'll twitch. This effect can also be seen on dead bodies, just like the bull in the Westcar Papyrus, and our device is capable of delivering that effect. It isn't far-fetched that the Egyptians would refer to this as reanimating the dead. After all, this discovery helped to inspire the story of Frankenstein in more modern times. If the Egyptians came up with this, what were they doing with the electricity? Do I think that they were using it to charge up their spaceships? Probably not. It may have served a twofold purpose. From their writings, we know that the ancient Egyptians were interested in reanimation after death. There are funerary rites to reanimate each section of the body: the brain, the head, limbs, etc., so that the spiritual body could move in the afterlife. For example, there's an opening of the mouth ceremony to allow the deceased to talk, to breathe, to eat. As such, I think that the Egyptians would have been keenly interested in being able to move their body after death. Archaeologists have also suggested that the pyramid shape may have symbolized sunbeams that the pharaoh could ascend to the stars. Perhaps the wires were routed to the top, creating a symbolic manifestation of the sun. The Egyptians certainly knew about electricity as a basic concept. What the Egyptians knew beyond that just isn't well documented. We've already discussed that they've had the means, the water, the metal, and the stone, to make this work, and I believe that we've also established the motivation to pursue this, as we know they were interested in reanimation and tying their beliefs into their architecture. And I think that they also had plenty of opportunity. When the Nile floods, you can't farm, and people have plenty of time for other things like art and public works. We estimate that Egypt contained around 2 million people during the time of Khufu, and that means 2 million opportunities for someone to make discoveries and ask questions. So, with means, motivation, and opportunity, I think that we might have circumstantial evidence for a theory, and I think it might tie together some of these anomalous features of the pyramid into a single plan, which is a lot more satisfying than most of the guesses that I've seen. Archaeology never provides a complete picture. The Egyptians certainly didn't document everything, and they may have wanted to keep secrets just like any other nation. Combine that with grave robbing, pilfering materials for use on remote sites, dynamite archaeology, and thousands of years to lose details, circumstantial evidence may be the closest that we're able to get to answers. Of course, some or all of the guesses in this video might be completely wrong. Guesswork and archaeology always go hand in hand, but the guesses are usually based upon some precedent. This is why the features of the Great Pyramid present something of a problem for archaeology at the moment. For example, the shafts and blocking stones are unlike anything that we've seen in all of our time researching ancient Egypt. The traditional archaeological toolkit may not be up to the challenge of explaining why these features exist. Personally, I'd rather have at least a theory than a mystery. Perhaps with enough people pondering over it, we can make sense out of it together. I've documented my sources in the description. If you disagree with anything, be sure to provide your documented sources too, but also feel free to speculate in the comments below, and let's try not to get too hung up over conventional wisdom. Here's why. Meet the father of conventional wisdom. This turd blossom's conventional wisdom stalled science for about 2,000 years. It really wasn't all that long ago that the thought of mankind flying was a fringe theory. Let's not make any hasty assumptions about what's impossible. At the time of filming this video, a guy's lunch choice in China has collapsed the world's economy. I think that we're well beyond saying what's impossible at this point. How about some bonus content? Now this is completely unrelated to the theory. Enjoy. Let's take a closer look at the jetty story from the Westcar Papyrus together. I'll point out a few hieroglyphs, so you'll see what I see. In this sentence it mentions a king's name. Royal names are enclosed in a cartouche, and this is what we see here. It mentions Cheops in the English translation. That's what the Greeks called him. However, in the hieroglyphs it reads as Khufu. Here's how this looks. We see the sieve is associated with the sound K, and the horned viper is associated with the sound F. And we also see the coiled rope is associated with the sound U. All languages evolve over time, and Egyptian is no exception. The pronunciation for the rope hieroglyph can also be expressed as the quail chick. Unlike many languages, you can read hieroglyphs from either left to right to left, or up to down. To know which direction, you would read into the faces. Another hint is that the end of the rope in the cartouche is the end of the name. Another point is that the Egyptians didn't always use vowels in their writing. We see this in the first example between the KH and the F. This is why we don't always know the proper pronunciation of Egyptian words. For example, you may have heard their sun god called Ra, but I've been referring to him as Re. We typically fill in the missing vowel with E, as it's the most frequently used letter in the English alphabet. But that doesn't mean that the Egyptians love that letter as much as we do. Something else that you'll see is the stacked letters. Egyptians focused on aesthetics. If two small hieroglyphs can be stacked, they'll do so even if it means losing a vowel. People familiar with the language would just fill in the gaps, like this for example. If you're having trouble reading that, just try saying it out loud. The Egyptians had no idea that there would be a time in which their spoken language would ever die out. And this system of writing worked perfectly well for thousands of years, until it didn't. It's therefore extremely likely that the commonly accepted pronunciation for Egyptian words wouldn't be understood by a person that lived during that time. If you want to learn how to write your name in hieroglyphs, you could use this. To be fair, it's a door-level understanding of their writing, but it's an excellent place to start. Here we see mention of the word horizon. The ancient name of Khufu's pyramid was Akhet Khufu, which means Khufu's horizon. The hieroglyph of the horizon is a sun between two mountains. Historians believe that Khufu planned for his pyramid and his son's pyramid to be the two mountains from that hieroglyph. That's pretty cool, huh? The term cartouche is actually French, and it means cartridge. When the French were exploring the Egyptian ruins, they'd see this symbol and didn't know what it meant. But to them it looked like their muzzle-loading, firearm paper powder cartridges, so that's what we're using today. This is how those cartridges looked at that time. The Egyptians didn't refer to Egypt as Egypt. They refer to it as KMT. Historians pronounce that as Kemet, but again, we don't know the vowels, so it could have been pronounced as Kumat or something else. We really don't know. The word KMT means black land, and it gets that name from the fertile soil that's left over after the Nile floods. As a side note, they refer to the desert as Deshret, which means red land. So why was it called Egypt? The Egyptian city of Memphis used to be called Het-Kapta. Het means place, Ka means soul, and Ptah is the name of one of their gods. So Het-Kapta literally translates to Temple of the Soul of Ptah. When the Greeks moved in, they pronounced Het-Kapta as Aegypta, and that's where we get the word Egypt today. Many English letters are based upon Egyptian hieroglyphs. Here's a quick overview of that. Sometimes words are also borrowed from ancient Egypt. Here's a little gift for my German friends. The Egyptian word for beetle is KPR. Auf Deutsch ist es Käfer. Perhaps it's an echo from the past. When heavy stones needed to be moved over the desert, this relief shows how it was done. They'd pour water on the sand, and then pull the object on a sledge. In 2014, researchers published that using the right quantity of water reduces the force needed to pull the weight by half. The Queen's Chamber shafts have an interesting backstory. Up until 1872, no shafts were known in the Queen's Chamber. In that year, an engineer decided to look for new shafts. Looking at a section on the southern wall where he thought a shaft might be located, he started chiseling away at it. His rambunctiousness paid off. He found the hidden shaft. Inside of it, he found a small two-pronged object made out of some kind of metal. He then went to the opposite side, the northern wall, and proceeded to damage, to explore for science. He found the other hidden shaft. Inside this shaft he found two objects, a rough stone ball and a 12-centimeter long piece of cedar wood with notches cut into it. So why were the Queen's Chamber shafts closed off? I think that the plan for the pyramid changed during construction. To understand this, let's take a quick history lesson. Khufu's dad, Seneferu, was the first to build a smoothly sloped pyramid. It took him several tries to get it right though. On his second to last pyramid, he settled on a 43-degree slope. This will be the same slope that he used on his final pyramid. I'm going to leave 43 degrees on the screen, you'll see why in a bit. Then it was Khufu's turn. The Great Pyramid has an angle of 51.5 degrees. But if you connect the bottom of the pyramid to the end of the Queen's Chamber shaft, you get 43 degrees. Historians had speculated about the redesign in the past because the stone sizes changed around the Queen's Chamber. Pyramids were expanded in similar manners in the past, so it seems possible. If so, then the Queen's Chamber's white limestone slabs once marked the planned edge of a scrapped, smaller design. When they realized that the shaft wouldn't be needed, there'd be no need to have holes in the chamber itself. So what was the purpose of the hook, the ball, and the piece of wood found in the Queen's Chamber shafts? We don't know yet. When the Egyptians created buildings, they would often place objects in certain inaccessible locations. For example, they would place objects in the foundation under the four corners of the buildings. I believe that these objects were placed there for a similar reason. My guess is that they made up a tool to mark angles. During the shaft camera surveys, we found what appears to be the remainder of the wooden rod, which is still located in the shaft. By retrieving it, we'll have a better idea of how that tool looked, its purpose, and we could even carbon date it. In other words,
that belongs in a museum.
Subscribe and ring the bell if you want to be notified about my future videos. Hopefully you learned something new, or at least found something interesting. If you liked the video, share it with your friends. If you hated it, share it with your enemies.